Hello and welcome to this last installment of live migration on a dime. The purpose of this last part of the screencast series is to demonstrate the difference between live migration and quick migration. Live migration is a new feature in Server 2008 R2. Quick migration was already possible with Hyper-V on Server 2008. So what you're seeing here is the failover cluster manager of my cluster. If you followed this series of episodes, you'll notice that it has changed slightly. In fact, I had a failure of one of the machines, which allowed me actually to provision a better machine and reconfigure the cluster with two cluster networks, number 1 and number 3. Now, cluster network number 3 is a private network only, completely switched, and it's what we're going to use for the live migration of the virtual machines. Cluster network number 1 is a public network that we can use to access both the virtual machines running on the cluster and the cluster itself for management purposes. So I have two virtual machines that are up and running on this cluster. One is on GM host 1 and the other is on GM host 4. The machine on GM host 1 resides on a cluster share volume, hence we can use live migration against it. The machine on GM host 4, on the other hand, does not reside on a cluster share volume. It resides on a standard cluster volume that is tied to the machine itself. So when we move the machine, we have to move the LUN that belongs to that cluster volume, which means that we can store with quick migration just one virtual machine to be quick migrated per volume. Also, to complete the initial scenario, I have the machines connected to the public network, and one, the first machine that you've seen, is pinged continuously by this command prompt. The other machine that you've seen is pinged continuously by this other command prompt. So the live migration machine is called GMC node 1. The quick migration machine has got this IP address here. So let's start the process for live migration. Let's go back to the virtual machine. There's something that I want to show you. If we go and scroll down to the properties of this particular virtual machine, we can select which of the networks that is available we're going to use for live migration. Cluster network 3 is my private network. It's totally isolated and it's going to be faster. If that shouldn't be available, I can always default back to cluster network 1, which is the publicly accessible network. So whilst we're here, I also want to show you that the only dependency for this virtual machine is the virtual machine configuration. It's not dependent on ownership of the volume where it sits. Let's start the live migration process here for this machine. So if we scroll back up, you'll see that I have a live migrate virtual machine option. So I live migrate to the other node, GM host 4. There is an initial phase where the machine memory is copied, and if we go here, we can see that there's been one timeout and one timeout only, and the machine is happily running around. So the dirty pages in memory are being copied across, and you can see it now. It's fully completed and it's running. Second timeout and the machine is back up and we can ping it. Now these timeouts are just a beta feature if you want. The final performance target is to be able to perform the final migration pass in less than it takes for a TCP connection to time out. Anyway, the machine is up and running. Now let's see what happens on the other hand to the storage. The storage has not been moved. It's always owned by GM host 1, but thanks to the cluster share volume mechanism, GM host 4 has direct block write access to the volume that both GM host 1 and GM host 4 see. GM host 1 is just coordinating metadata updates. Let's go to the second machine and start on the other end a process of moving. Live migration is highlighted but wouldn't work because the machine does not reside on a cluster share volume. So we just want to move this to GM host 1 and see what happens. So first of all, the machine is saved, and whilst it's being saved, connections time out, and it's not possible to use it from a client point of view. Now that the machine is saved, we need to change the ownership of the underlying volume. You see now that the volume has come back online, and once the volume is online, we need to start restoring that virtual machine into the memory of GM host 1. And for the whole duration of this process, there is no connectivity to the virtual machine. And once the virtual machine has been fully restored, we can start using it again. The restore process is coming along. Just a few more seconds, and we should be back in business. There you go, the machine is now running and responding to pings. So we've seen one timeout and one timeout only with the live migration process, and a number of timeouts and destination unreachable for the quick migration process. And if you want to check now what happened to the cluster disk 1, i.e. volume H, GM host 1 now owns also volume H, whilst previously it was only controlling the cluster share volume, and the cluster share volume is still owned by GM host 1 as well, although it's GM host 4 that is using it at this point in time. GM host 4 on the other end owns the quorum volume in this particular case, this queue. Okay, that concludes our series of webcasts on live migration. I plan to build another series of webcasts on top of this infrastructure as soon as a System Center Virtual Machine Manager for 2008 R2 becomes available, and I plan to illustrate how to manage a virtualized infrastructure with that, leveraging live migration, quick migration, and other features in R2. Thank you very much for your attention so far. Thanks again.